The only reason we've been able to unearth this abuse and cover-up, as well as other examples of abuse and cover-up, is because of the Grand Jury Act and because of the latitude it gives us to hold these predators accountable, to hold the enablers accountable. We have got to protect this. Right now, I think the people of Pennsylvania want me and want other prosecutors to go out and hold powerful institutions accountable, not shield them from the reach of the law. And that is exactly what we did here in this clergy abuse case. It's what we're doing, what we did in Penn State. It's what we're doing, though not with children, still involving sexual abuse at the Lackawanna County Prison. And that is important work that we do day in and day out. And we need all the tools at our disposal to do that across the board. Just to be clear, I'm fighting to make sure that every single survivor's truth is told. None of them should be redacted. No one survivor's truth is less important than another. So my primary focus when we go to court on September the 26th for oral argument before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court is to have a full unredacted report be released. Understand that the petitioners are fighting to block that, and they're fighting to try to undermine or do away with the Grand Jury Act, an act that is critical to unearthing the truth that big institutions want to cover up, want to hide, whether it's organized crime or public corruption or the type of widespread, large-scale, systematic cover-up and abuse that we saw here in the Catholic Church. All Pennsylvanians should be concerned that these petitioners might succeed at undermining the Grand Jury Act and thus making it harder for Pennsylvanians to know the truth about what's happening in big institutions or what's happening in their government. The Grand Jury Act permits me the ability, as the Attorney General, and DAs for that matter, to write reports, unearth the type of secret horrors that we were able to unearth here, and make recommendations to lawmakers for change. Ultimately, it's up to them as to whether or not they want to adopt the change, like, for example, these 4 recommendations contained in the Grand Jury Report. Our hotline has received 933 calls in the 3 weeks since the Grand Jury Report was released. So following the Altoona-Johnstown report, in the 2 years post-Altoona-Johnstown, our clergy abuse hotline received just over 300 calls. 2 years, about 300 calls. Here, in 3 weeks since this Grand Jury Report, we've received 933 calls. Now, the question you ask is, what are we doing with those calls? Each and every one of those calls are being handled by one of our specially trained agents, typically from our child predator unit. We then make a determination based on the call, based on the conversation that we've had, what warrants further investigation. The statute of limitations reform that the grand jury recommended is that there should be no criminal statute of limitations for child sexual abuse. 41 other states, actually let me be clear, 39 other states, Guam and the District of Columbia, so 41 jurisdictions, have done away with the statute of limitations on the criminal side. Understand that we have a limitation on the amount of time I can bring a criminal case. So just to focus on these 301 predator priests, those who are alive, we ran each and every one of them through a statute of limitations test. And here in Pennsylvania, because of our laws, we were only able to charge 2 of them. Now, one has already pled guilty, but we were only able to charge 2. If I was the Attorney General in another one of those jurisdictions, one of those 41 jurisdictions, I could have charged each and every one of those predator priests. We didn't just run a statute of limitations test on the predator priests. We ran a statute of limitations test on the people who covered up the abuse as well. And we couldn't charge them either. Generally speaking, the statute of limitations on those kinds of crimes is 5 years. Many of those enablers, many of those people who covered it up, are still in active ministry and in positions of leadership within the church here in Pennsylvania and now across the country. The grand jury found, through the church's own documents, that the Vatican knew about the predator priests, some predator priests, and some of the cover-up. Just because someone was alleged to have abused a child didn't mean that they automatically were named in the report. We tried as best as we could to corroborate that allegation, both with the church's documents as well as with testimony, and where we could corroborate it, then it was listed. The grand jury felt that it was important to only name the names where they could have corroborating evidence and corroborating facts to bolster some allegation. And so they were trying to be conservative, if you will, in terms of who they named. And I think that was the right approach. And, as the grand jury pointed out, they had received information on more than 400 priests, listed 301 predator priests, and they received information on over 1,000 victims, but they believe that the real number is in the thousands. Those are the words of the grand jury.